Hey, what's going on people? In this video we'll be going over the best builds for Zane in Borderlands 3. This video features a number of extremely powerful and unique builds, so no matter what your playstyle is, there's something in here to suit you. Save files are linked in the description, and let's crack into it. We open with Digi Zane, a build focusing on maximizing the damage output of the clone. He's the only friend you'll need, and although looks identical, is still somehow more handsome. This build is pretty straightforward, just summon the Digiclone in a spot where he can see what you want him to shoot at, and wait until he drains that health bar. The weapons you give him do make a big difference though, and I'll suggest a few a little later. First though, here's the skill tree. We get the orange tree capstone so we can give the clone a copy of our gun, and the other skills go into boosting Zane's damage. However, you may not have access to the director's cut, so here's a version of the skill tree focusing on base game players. Regardless of the build for augments, I like to pick up Doppelbanger to provide a quick reset on the clone's position without having to swap places, and Schadenfreude for a quick top up of shields whenever our Digiclone gets hurt. As far as the Digiclone is concerned, the two most important pieces of gear for this build include the gun we give them, obviously, and the shield, because they also get a copy of ours. That makes the Revolter a top tier choice, and we'll want an action skill start anointment for our benefit, but because the clone gets it too and doesn't have an action skill, we'll want a lower level one so the clone can proc its effects too. Other good choice shields include the Infernal Wish, and for the base game you can't go wrong with the Transformer, or the version OM. To round off the gear, the specific grenade mod doesn't matter, we're not going to be throwing them, but you'll want one to cover all of the action skill and elemental anointments. As far as artifacts go, the Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge is a great choice, and the Icebreaker Victory Rush is a great option from the base game. For class mods, the Executor is your best all-round choice, giving Zane that extra bit of damage, but if you wanted to give even more damage to the clone, you can always grab the Seeing Dead class mod with 5 points in Donnybrook. Obviously, for rolls on our class mods, we'll want action skill damage, and because the clone shares Zane's splash damage, splash radius, and elemental damage boosts, we'll want to increase those on both our class mods and artifacts where we can. Onto weapons now, and there's a few that'll maximize the damage of the clone. One of the best ones is the Sandhook that deals phenomenal levels of damage. It'll tear through mobs and bosses, and it's a hard gun to look past. It also synergizes well with the Digiclone regen ammo anointment, allowing Zane to mob with it, so both you and your clone can deal high damage with it 24/7. That anointment is also well suited to something like the Tizzy, or a fully stacked Sleeping Giant, which is a Sleeping Giant of a weapon in its own right. Other good weapons include the Free Radical or even the Light Show. Any weapon that's powerful in Zane's hands will most likely be powerful with the clone. Because the clone is essentially stuck in the mud, it performs well with weapons that don't need direct line of sight. That includes things like the Hive or the Plague Bearer, even weapons like the Breath of the Dying or Creeping Corruption, which lean more to the mobbing side of things, are always great fun in the clone's hands. There is one weapon that trumps them all though, and that is the Grease Trap. The reason for this is because of its unique effect, where its secondary firing mode boosts the power of its primary. This allows you to grease up enemies for your clone to tear them down, allowing you to apply even more damage on top of the already amazing amount of mayhem scaling the clone gets. There's not many combinations in the game that can better this for raw damage output. It truly is a match made in the air fryer. Now we're throwing back to one of the oldest builds in the game, Zane with the Redistributor. This synergy has been in the game for almost as long as the game's been out, launching with the melee one takedown, and like most things is even stronger today. It's a build that excels while mobbing, and there's things in here to make the bossing easy too. If you're wondering what the skill tree looks like, here it is on screen, but this is one build where the items are a necessity. Of course, that includes the Redistributor, an SMG which you can obtain from the melee one takedown. Its unique effect causes every amp shot to chain to nearby enemies, and for every amp shot, every 7th one naturally, to deal bonus damage. However, while we've got the barrier equipped, all of our shots will chain, thanks to its effect that causes any projectile that passes through the barrier to be amped, although only the 7th receives that damage bonus. Either way, when that effect is active 24/7, this gun absolutely shreds, dealing with hordes of enemies with absolute ease. The other action skill we'll be running is the cannon to proc those action skill and elemental anointments and get some bonus damage from the revolter. Other good shields include the Infernal Wish for an extra projectile, although it will burn you, and the Frozen Heart, which will help us to bring the freeze, causing cryonovas each time we activate our action skill that have a high chance of freezing enemies. To maximize this build's damage, that's what we'll want to be doing while mobbing, and the perfect artifact for that is an Icebreaker Victory Rush, which grants us 50% bonus damage against frozen enemies and improves our cryo efficiency. At least that's the bonus that the prefix applies. The Victory Rush provides us with bonus movement speed and damage after we defeat a badass enemy. Out of the two, the Icebreaker prefix will do more for this build. Now, because the Redistributor is chaining rounds to enemies all over the place, think like a reflux in SMG form, we're gonna freeze the battlefield with ease and activate this bonus damage quite comfortably. When things are frozen, they also can't shoot at you, which is another plus for this build's survivability aspect. The class mod I recommend is the Executor, which among other things, increases our crit damage by 75%. We'll be landing criticals naturally, not only because of the bonus damage we get from them, but because it will help to freeze enemies faster. For your grenade mod, it doesn't really matter, but you'll want either your shield or your grenade mod to have an action skill in Cryo Anointment for mobbing, and that'll give you enough cryo damage to freeze things. Or you can even pick up a Cryo Redistributor, but radiation is better for mobbing. And there's a few elements in the save file for you to play around with. I had a lot of fun pairing a Corrosive Redistributor with the Flesh Melter Victory Rush. Another good Hyperion SMG that can benefit from the protection of the barrier include the Smog. While its weapon shield is active, it deals bonus damage, and because it matches the manufacturer of the Redistributor and is also an SMG, Hyperion crit and SMG damage rolls on our class mod are great choices. Because this build excels while mobbing, it's no surprise that it does lack a little while bossing, and that's evident with the Redistributor's effect. However, the Smog will perform the same, but you'll want to use weapons like the Sandhawk or Tizzy when taking on some of the bigger boys. You'll also want to switch up your artifact to a Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge if you're not using a splash damage weapon. For anointments, consecutive hits isn't a bad choice for the Redistributor, although I prefer next to max. And again, if you're using a splash damage weapon, the action skill in splash damage anointment is preferred. Moving on to Eraser Zane, Zane's most powerful build. This build is similar to the one featured in my best builds in 2024 video, but where that one gives you multiple options, this one goes purely down the path of Eraser, aiming to maximize its damage. And we do that by making each and every explosion as large and as strong as possible. That's done thanks to Eraser, one of the most busted skills in the game. Essentially, when you hit a critical, a new projectile will spawn, which double dips in splash damage and splash radius. It's much more powerful than the projectile that procced it, and can proc another. But how do we do that? Well, it's most easily done through the Hustler class mod, which allows our splash damage to hit criticals, and have a 5% chance to deal between 25 and 125% more damage. And if you're wondering what the skill tree looks like for this build, here it is on screen now. Other than Eraser, the most important skill for this build is Duct Tape mod, so we can avoid taking some shrapnel to the knee. This skill tree also includes Cold Bore for that massive boost in cryo damage whenever we swap weapons. The shield we'll be using for this build is the Infernal Wish, which adds an extra projectile to each of our shots. When playing dirty procs, that can be up to 3, and each of those has potential to proc Eraser, resulting in some monumental amounts of damage. You'll want to look for amp augments for your Infernal Wish, and you'll want one with each of the action skill and elemental anointments. However, you'll also want one with an anointment that doesn't apply an element, for reasons we'll get to later, and Sentinel move speed is the best. For artifacts, the Toboggan synergizes the best with this build, providing us with 100% bonus amp damage whenever we slide, and we'll be sliding often because of that damage through movement speed we get with skills such as Violent Momentum and Violent Speed. Because our focus is on maximizing splash damage with low projectile weapons, we'll want to pick up splash annoyance on each and every one of our guns that can roll with them. We'll also want to boost area of effect radius on our artifact and our class mod. But to take this build a step further, we'll also want to increase splash radius, and we can do that on our artifact as well, as long as we have an AoE roll in either slot 2 or 3. With all those splash radius boosts though, things get out of hand. We'll be dealing so much damage at such a high radius that we're gonna down ourselves at every opportunity, even with duct tape mod. That's because the elements applied on our gun through anointments or the gun itself aren't prevented by duct tape mod. Because of that, it's important to only deal in one element, an element that you can protect yourself from. Or you could even use a non-elemental weapon, and that's why the Creamer is a fantastic choice. So if you're dealing shock damage, you'll want a transformer. If you're dealing radiation damage, you'll want a red suit, which synergizes incredibly well with an elemental projector artifact. And because cryo doesn't apply a dot, you can use any cryo weapons you like. Whatever element you're dealing damage in though, you need to remember that anointments affect it too. So just keep that in mind and you should be fine. On screen now is a list of weapons that this build absolutely maximizes. And there's a lot of them there that you wouldn't even think of using. Some more important tips to remember when it comes to actually dealing damage with this build is that the projectile spawned through Eraser can't actually hit the enemy that it would spawn through. That's why you'll see in some of the clips here that the projectile is actually flying through the target and hitting a solid surface next to them when the splash radius is dealing the damage. That's critical to understanding how Eraser works and maximizing the damage of this build, so you might want to write that one down. Now for Giga Cannon Zane, a Zane build that won't have you firing any weapons except for the one on your shoulder. Inspired by Jolts' crit cannon build, but updated for level 72. This build maximizes the damage of Zane's shoulder cannon, able to one-shot mobs with ease, and defeat bosses before you've even used all its charges. If you're looking for the skill tree, here it is on screen, and the augments will change depending on the situation, and I'll let you know when you might want to change them up soon. Before we get to that, let's go over where the damage comes from, as it's not really from our skills. It comes from the gear, the most important piece being an Unforgiven, which provides us with a massive critical damage boost. The highest crit boost it can come with is 432%, and you'll definitely want that, and you'll also want one with the Mantis Cannon Anointment to increase its damage by 150%. Coupling well with that is Zane's Executor class mod, which grants us 75% bonus crit damage, and it gives us a nice 20% cryo damage boost, among other things. It is a kill skill, so each time we proc our cannon, we proc these effects thanks to Zane's Seeing Red skill. There's not many rolls on your class mod that will affect the cannon, that's why we go for action skill damage, which definitely does, but also Jacob's crit damage and weapon crit will do so as well through the Unforgiven. Of course we want a Revolter for that passive 200% bonus shock damage whenever it breaks, and we need one with an action skill start anointment. The artifact that suits us the most is the Victory Rush, giving us bonus move speed and damage after we defeat a badass enemy. And remember, move speed is important if we want to maximize the damage of this build. I've gone with an Icebreaker prefix because it synergizes well with Zane, but it doesn't do too much because you one-shot things anyway. Best rolls on the artifact include elemental damage in the form of shock or cryo, move speed, and action skill cooldown rate. This build, unlike many Zane builds, allows us to throw grenades, and there's a reason for that. In order to get the bonus cryo damage from Trick of the Light, which does affect the cannon, we need our enemies to not target us. And we do that through the Mesmer, which turns enemies into allies for 10 seconds, as long as they're caught up in the blast radius. Its Piss is another good grenade mod, and the best anointments include action skill and elemental damage in the form of radiation when you're mobbing, or matched element to the health bar when you're bossing. Speaking of bossing, to get maximum damage from this build, We'll want to activate the Colder Shoulder Augment and couple that with Proliferation. That makes our cannon shoot freeze rays, which we have better synergy with, and increases its power based on the remaining charges we have. While mobbing, accuracy is incredibly important. We're putting all our eggs in that crit basket, and if you're not landing them, you're gonna miss out on a whole lot of damage. If you find that your cannons left you on cooldown, then the augments Brain Drain and Proliferation couple well together, granting a maximum of 5 charges and restoring 2 whenever you get a critical kill with it. Aiming is the challenge with this build because any cannon shot that lands is going to obliterate whatever it touches, and even whatever's beside it. This build will make you feel like an unstoppable force of nature once you've got your aiming down pat. Don't be afraid either to throw in some unforgiven pot shots in between the cannon blasts to really ram the whole thing home. Now to my Grandmaster Zane build, which is exactly what it sounds like. A more traditional weapon build allowing you to deal fantastic damage with just about any weapon in the game. It does that by abusing the cannon's ability to proc anointments with ease and picking up many of Zane's gun damage skills along the way. And here are those skills on screen now, and essentially what this build is telling us is for maximum damage we'll want to be moving fast, aiming down sights, and landing criticals. That is made more apparent with the class mod of choice, the Executor, which grants us a multitude of bonuses whenever we kill an enemy, and the main one being 75% bonus crit damage. Of course, when we're spec'd into seeing red, we don't need to kill enemies, we can simply fire off our cannon to activate this class mod too, as it's treated as a kill skill. For stat rolls in our class mod, you want anything that boosts weapon damage, that includes splash damage, and mag size isn't a bad choice either. Especially when it comes to our artifact, in this case the Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge, you'll definitely want a mag size roll on that. An Icebreaker Victory Rush isn't a bad base game option, and neither is the Company Man. What boosts our damage the most though is our shield, a Revolter, and you'll want one with the Action Skill Start Anointment, so we can activate its 15 seconds of bonus fire rate and 200% bonus shock damage. Other options include the Infernal Wish if you want to try your hand at one-shotting with single projectile weapons, or you could even try the Old God, and a base game option, the Transformer. For grenade mods, these are simply here to activate the action skill and elemental anointments. I prefer the It's Piss, just for that debuff it provides, and our drone is going to randomly chuck one whenever it wants to. There's plenty of top performing weapons that slot into this build magically. One of them is the Crit, one of my personal favourites, and this provides a massive boost to crit damage, which is perfect for this build. It is locked to shock though, so you'll want a next to mags anointment and an element of the health bar you're attacking. Next to mags is generally the best anointment choice for your weapons in this build, and I generally like to match the element with that of the gun. But like I said, sometimes that's impractical, so you'll want to match it for the occasion, and radiation is always a great choice while mobbing. However, if the weapon you're using deals splash damage like the Plasma Coil or Ember's Purge, you'll definitely want to pick up an action skill and splash damage anointment. There's so many guns in the game that excel in this build, and this build is a great showcase for how Zane can turn practically any gun into a boss melter. Essentially, he only lacks with semi-automatic weapons, so if your weapon is fully auto, then this build should be able to maximize its damage potential. Because I simply can't name them all, here's a list of weapons that this build in particular has Zane absolutely excelling with. As long as you manage to hit those crits, these weapons will do work.